Welcome to Confessions of an EOS Implementer, a podcast by Talent Harbor. We share unique stories of EOS implementers and the companies they've transformed to give you a rare glimpse into the successes and the challenges of the system in action. I'm your host, Ryan Hogan. Let's jump in. Hey, welcome to Confessions of an EOS Implementer, brought to you by Talent Harbor. Joining us today is Adrian Dayton, a trailblazer in the entrepreneurial landscape and a certified EOS implementer out of Salt Lake City. We had an incredible conversation. We talked about the necessity of buy-in when it comes to the senior leadership team. We talked about signs of bad cultures. We talked about the importance of vulnerability. We talked a little bit about his success and his story, and his journey is just incredible. So I can't wait for you to hear the show. Stay tuned, and it's coming right up. Adrian, you've had an absolutely impressive journey from M&A attorney to entrepreneur, and then today you were a certified EOS implementer. What drew you to this world of entrepreneurship and EOS?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, the reality is, at a very early age, I just realized that that I really liked making money, and I was pretty good at figuring it out, right? Like, I kind of joke, I don't know if you ever watched Seinfeld, there's the character Kramer, and one day Jerry's like, Kramer, I don't get it. You just fall into money, right? But I mean, it's not that easy, but it's like, but relatively, it's like business has just come easy for me, So, when I was a kid, I remember I was in junior high, and I had two different teachers. They're both running the same fundraiser, and they knew that I was going to crush it. So behind my back, they negotiated a split of whatever I made on the fundraiser, But I've always been very driven, and it's kind of funny because my whole time in school, I was trying to find what am I best at, right? And it wasn't sports, right? It wasn't public speaking. It wasn't debate, it wasn't until after I got out of school and I realized I just love business. And so I went to law school. I got a law degree really because I thought it would help me be a better business person. But the goal was always to build a business. And it's just that's what I love.
That's when you talk about your early days. So I used to sell, if you remember creepy crawlers, it was like the Easy Bake Oven. Uh-huh. So I used to sell creepy crawlers in third grade. And it sounds like I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs, and it feels like people that just kind of, it's always been kind of this thing that's happened very, very early in life and almost like a calling. And it sounds like it's been very similar for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, it's interesting. I built my business, and I learned how to really leverage my time, and so that I could enjoy life and get a lot done. And then kind of an important moment for me, 3 years ago, I was asked to coach the EO Accelerator. So you've been in Vistage, EO, or do you say, yeah. So, you meet with this group every month. It's a great program. But they have an accelerator to help companies grow from $250,000 a year to $1 million. And they have a great curriculum for them. And I was asked to volunteer to spend half a day once a month with this group. And I was kind of I don't know if I'm going to like this. That's a lot of my time that I'm just volunteering. And from the first day with these people, there's just these young entrepreneurs that they're like sponges. They just want to know. It's growing a big business is hard and requires a lot of luck, but getting to $1 million, anybody can do it. It's been done 1 million times. There's a template. And I just realized, not only did I loved building my businesses, I also just love helping people grow their businesses. It's just so much fun.
So I think that probably steals the answer for my next question, because we went from how you started, and then how you had this calling for business, and law school was really more of a vehicle to make you a better business person because you knew you were already on that track. But now you're a certified EOS implementer, and so what made you do that transition?
Yeah, great question. So I built a software company, Clearview Social, and I grew that over about 9 years. And then after I sold it, and kind of cashed out, and had a little bit of an earnout, so I had to stay just over a year there. And it's interesting, right? In this book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things, it talks about how almost all entrepreneurs suffer, right? A lot of them have ADHD, a lot of them have depression, and after exit, something like 60% of entrepreneurs, after selling their business, right, they have this great payday. Within a year, they're clinically depressed, So I was very aware of that. And so I wanted to find something that was important to me. And a buddy of mine said, do you really want to just build another software company that's 10 times as big as the last one? And while that seems like a natural progression, the truth is your first big business, you put your heart into it, right? And there's so much at stake, and you're you're trying to prove that like you're worth a damn, right? Like you're trying to prove that like you've got what it takes to be successful. And then you sell your company and you realize like, even though you have this outward sign of success, that success is really just within. It's believing in yourself. I know it sounds like so cheesy, but it's like believing and knowing and loving yourself is just, it's just so much more important than anything else you can accomplish, you know? So it's like, once I sold my company and stepped down, like the real work began of figuring out like what really matters to me. And as I looked back at all the activities I was doing, I asked the question like, what really sparks the most joy from me? What gives me the most life? And it was this half day each month, you know, just feeding these small entrepreneurs and helping them grow their business. And so it's just like, okay, how do I do that every day? And, you know, my exit wasn't so big that I'm like buying a private island. So I still do need to make money. And so I ran my business on EOS. I was a big believer. And I thought, you know what? Why don't I go learn to be an EOS implementer? And even if it's not the perfect job for me, it's going to make me so much better at running my next business. And it just turns out like, I love it. Like it's great. Anyway, so it's been really fun.
That's it's so interesting. There's like so many kind of rabbit holes to go down there. One is, did you discover this? Did you have this epiphany of like success is from within? Like, was that through some discovery post-acquisition, or were you already on that train of like, I am successful regardless of what happens with this company?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you had talked to me at any point along the process of building my business, you know, the first 5 years, I had really heavy doubts of myself, and that motivated me, right? I mean, you remember the early days of your business, like you're reading everything, you're getting coaches, you're mentors, whatever you can find to make you better, because it's like the task in front of you is more than your skills can currently handle, right? And then you start having success, and you know, and I think there was a point where I felt like kind of like I had arrived. Like, you know, you get over a few $1 million in revenue and you're like, yeah, this is working. Like I'm pretty good at this. It wasn't until the business sold, I think, that it really hit me that like I was chasing something. My whole life I had been chasing something. And once I got there, only then really did I start doing the work of, and I mean, maybe I'd started a couple years before, but it really hits you. You start asking the question like, why did I really do this? Why did I build this business? And for me, these things came up of, oh, you know, I was raised in a family of 5 boys, and I had 3 older brothers who, it was kind of like the Royal Tannenbaums. Like they were all geniuses. They were all amazing, talented people, and they were all older than me and smarter and more talented and better artists. And they would just beat on me, not physically, but like psychologically, right? And so I grew up with this chip on my shoulder. Like I have got to prove myself. Like I am as good as my older brothers. And I mean, the irony is it's like I overcorrected, right? Like I've become extremely successful. I mean, I built a great business and I did all this stuff. And it's like, you know, was that a good reason? Was that a good reason to be successful? You know? And so even though that drove me to build my first business, once that like illusion was lifted, right? Like I love my brothers. We have a great relationship. Like there's been a lot of healing there. Like it's all good now, you know, like I've worked on myself. But for me to find the fire to build another business, I can't go back to that, right? Because I've already proven to myself, like, you know, that little illusion is kind of gone. And so it was really digging deeper to find, you know, what's really going to motivate me to do my great work and continue on, you know, with what I want to do next.
That's awesome. When you said that you used EOS inside of the business that you sold, When did you start to implement EOS and how did you discover it?
Yeah, great question. So this is like my EOS conversion story. So somebody randomly handed me a book of traction at some event, and I put it in my backpack, and I got on an airplane, and I'd heard about the book from someone else. So I pulled out the book and I started reading it, and I kept stopping and taking notes. And like the person sitting next to me is like, sees me reading this book and like taking notes on it, right? Like, you know, I'm trying to like decipher something. I don't know. I read the whole book in one sitting. And I was just like, I was at this place in my business where, I mean, I'm a creator, I'm a visionary. I like to build things and figure things out and systems and all of that. But I was completely overwhelmed by the number of systems and things you need to figure out in a business, right? Because it was my first business, right? Like, how do I run my meetings? How do I measure the performance of my people? You know, just, you know, on and on and on, right? And I opened the book and it's just like every chapter was like, oh, this is a very simple model and I can just install this and I can install this. And so I I took it all, right? I mean, and at this time I was reading, 2 books a month, and I was implementing things from every book. But it's like, if all the other books I read were like 60% of what I did in my business, like Traction was like 40%, which is a massive amount, right? Like it was the most impactful business book I'd ever read in terms of where I was right there in my business.
It's so interesting you said there's I was out in Seattle with my family, so I'm geobaching in Newport, Rhode Island right now. But I was out in Seattle, and I went bouldering with my son, and I have Traction at the house, and I was like, listen, you can skip your entire MBA and just read Traction, because it'll tell you the infrastructure and like how to manage the process, the framework, and how to manage any business. It's that impactful of a book. Between that, like for me, it was, I got started off of the lean startup. And so for me, it was all about like, how do you test demand before you actually invest a lot of money and effort and energy into a product? And so anything that I've ever built and launched has always been, it doesn't really exist, but it looks like it exists. And it only exists or comes into existence if someone actually pulls out their wallet and makes a purchase. And so like once you find product market fit, then it's all about, well, what do I do with this? What's the framework to manage it? And that really comes from Traction. So
right. And that's and to be honest, like that's the limitation of Traction. If you want to start a business, don't read Traction, read Lean Startup, right? Like it doesn't get you to product market fit. But for where I was in my business, if you have a business and it's just overwhelming, like Traction is a lifesaver.
Yep. And there's two different types of, there's two different camps on building a business. There's one that you build businesses for an exit. So you're looking at your competitors and you're trying to figure out what can you build in which can be easily acquired. And you've got this exit on the horizon. There's another one where you're building for a century. And so you're constantly heads down and you're focused on the product. Which approach in your view works best?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, the reality is most businesses aren't going to last 100 years, but I think some very visionary leaders, they have a pretty big vision of where their thing can go, right? Like, we've all heard the story of Bill Gates was pretty bold in like late 70s, early 80s to set a big, hairy, audacious goal of putting a computer in every home, right? Like he was not looking to make $1 million or $1 billion. He was looking to change the world, right? You're right. You look at Elon Musk. He's not looking to invent cool crap. He's looking to colonize the moon, right? And so I think for certain like visionaries of just epic proportion, like it's inevitable that their business is going to last 100 years. I don't know. For most of us, like, I don't know, people that are a little more normal, I don't know, building something that's valuable enough for someone to buy is pretty awesome, So, I mean, I don't know if that really answers your question, but the truth is, most of the businesses out there are not made to last 100 years. They're just made to solve people's problems and make people's lives better. And I think that's great. I mean, I love it.
Yep. I 100% agree. Like to me, it's all about like, if you can bring enough value into this world in which someone else is willing to trade you for that value, like there's no greater feeling than that.
Yeah.
I don't know how you feel about this, and it depends on probably like where you were at in building your company. Like I always went back and forth, like, is my vision big enough? And like, are we gonna go and conquer the world, or is this just gonna be this little thing which is great and eventually get acquired? And there was always this like internal tension of like, is this $1 billion company and we're gonna push it to get there, or is there gonna be an off ramp or an exit ramp somewhere along the way? But anyhow, I digress. So you've actually won some, or you've won an award, or you have one of the fastest growing like EOS certified implementers. One of the fastest growing.
So it's kind of funny story behind that. So when I became an EOS implementer, I was like, you know what? If I just have 4 or 5 clients, be a little income, I could still like golf and ski and surf and like have the lifestyle of someone who sold their business, but then have some work here and there. And then I went through the boot camp. That's how you get like ramped up to be an implementer. And the last day they put up on this screen all the records, right? And they're like, in the first 6 months, the fastest growing, firm ever, right? Whatever, implementer, got 10 clients in their first 6 months, right? And so like, and it's funny, it's like, it wasn't even like intentional by me, but like my brain just immediately went, I'm going to beat that. I'm definitely going to beat that. And I like saw myself in my mind, like 6 months from then when I was at the next quarterly meeting, I was going to see my picture up on there as the new record holder, And then we got home and I just hit the ground running and, I broke the record. But anyway, so it's just in the first 6 months, there's tons of records. There's tons of EOS implementers that have way more clients than me and make way more money than me. But I got off to a really fast start. And it was pretty fun, especially after a couple of years, the last couple of years running my software company, not being the most exciting and then having, some time off. Like it was really fun to dive into something new with both feet.
And how did you, I think maybe we will get some EOS implementers that listen to this as well. Like what was your secret sauce to that?
Sure. Yeah. And in that way, it's like, I don't think this advice is going to be very helpful for them. So what was most impactful is that the 5 years before that, I had done an incredible amount of free volunteer work, helping people grow their companies to $1 million a year, So, I mean, I had over a dozen people that I had made into millionaires as a volunteer, So they were my first calls like, hey, you remember how I helped you like build your business for free? Like, do you want to take it to the next level? You'll have to pay me something for it, right? So those were pretty easy calls. And then I've been on the board of EO. So I have a great network of, like some of the people that went through bootcamp with me were like, I don't know any business owners. I'm going to have to meet some once I finish here. Whereas I had a Rolodex, So having a great network is a big help. And obviously like being social, which I don't know, you probably can tell I'm pretty social, but
When you are helping a new business implement EOS, like I'm sure there's always challenges. And I'm sure in some cases there's resistance. Sometimes that comes from individuals on the leadership team. Sometimes that comes deeper inside of the organization. Like what's one kind of consistent challenge that you see when you're trying to implement EOS into a new business?
Yeah. So number one friction point, and I'm sure you saw this in your business, you obviously figured it out, but number one friction point for every single business is that when they first meet with me, the founder is taking on way too much. The CEO is taking on way too much. So just that idea of I like to say, I think the word delegate is overused because delegate means you say to someone, here, you take all these tasks and you do them, right? I think it's really about empowering your leaders, right? So you can give someone tasks, but that's distinct. And like a robot or a virtual assistant can do tasks. What you really want is to surround yourself with leaders. So instead of having a CEO-led or a founder-led company, you have a leadership team-led company. And that's the leap every single company that works with me is trying to make, is this leap from, compassionate or visionary leader who everyone comes to, kind of like a spoke and hub, right? Like everyone goes to the leader to get their questions answered, to the leader just kind of like letting go of the reins and saying, you guys are going to run the company. I'm just going to give you direction as you go. And anyway, it seems so simple, but it's so hard. But when companies do it, it works every time, if they have the right people.
And we'll definitely get into the right people.
Yeah.
And who do you think that's harder for? Like, because generally you probably have the visionary that's coming to you. I'm sure that's the case because a visionary is overloaded and they're like, I need a new way in which to manage this business. Who do you typically find that it's harder for? Is it the people that are now like, oh, I have these data points and I have that I need to be accountable for, and I have these rocks in which I am committed to. Therefore, like I know what I need to do and I'm just going to get the job done, or the founder who has to release some control?
Yeah. So I think there's two groups of people it's very difficult for. The first group are leaders. And frankly, I don't attract a lot of these people because I don't know, we just don't get along, but like that are very arrogant. So if you have a leader that's very arrogant, then not only are they not teachable, but they're unwilling to believe that somebody else can do the job good enough, right? And so what I always say is, sorry, I was about to quote somebody else, and so I can't start that by saying what I always say, but one of my mentors, Dan Martell, always says, like 80% done by someone else, is 100% amazing, right? So this whole idea that if someone else can get it done and it's good enough, then that allows you to focus on highest and best use of your time. Okay. So when you have an arrogant leader that just doesn't trust anyone to meet their standard, that makes it very difficult to delegate, or empower. right? But the other group, and this is a little more insidious, is, and we talked a little bit about inner work earlier, but the people that have low self-esteem. So the leader that has their own challenges with confidence, they worry that as they give these things away, that they're not going to feel as good about themselves, that it takes something away from them. And, maybe, obviously there's an interplay between the arrogance and, that self-esteem, so maybe it's always both of those things, but it does, right? It takes confidence to trust your people that they can own these things and get them done well.
So vulnerability is a big part of a team that can communicate and work through issues. What are some of the ways in which you help a senior leadership team become vulnerable and discuss and talk about the right issues?
Yeah, I love the topic of vulnerability, and I think vulnerability is probably the least understood and the most important part of building a good team. So in terms of how I help teams, I need to add one kind of caveat before I even say how, because you have to have buy-in. And I've got a lot of great clients. I work with a lot of great leaders, but some of them have not yet bought in fully to the idea of vulnerability, the idea that it will actually make them stronger to open up and show some of their weaknesses. And so anyway, I had that caveat. If they're willing to, the term in EO in the entrepreneur organizations, like get naked fast, right? Be willing to expose themselves. I guess that doesn't sound any better, does it? Anyway, but if they're willing to go deep, then there's some great exercises. And so there's two that I really love. One is kind of an official EOS exercise, and it's called the one thing. And you may be familiar with this, but in the one thing, you first share, everyone on the team sits around and you let everyone know it's confidential. Everything that's said in that room stays there. Everyone shares one thing they admire about everyone at the table. Then you go around again and everyone shares one thing that everyone on the table needs to start or stop doing, right? Some area where there's room for improvement. And it's so interesting. Every time, they start writing and they're just uncomfortable and they're grumbling. And then when it's time for them to share, nobody wants to go first and it's so awkward. And then when people start sharing at the end, people are just on edge, but then they're so curious about what others have to say about them. And at the end, they say, well, I didn't want to tell people what they need to stop doing, but I badly, badly wanted to hear what I need to stop doing, right? And that's the thing about vulnerability that's surprising is the vulnerable part is not people exposing you. It's you feeling the trust that you can give honest feedback, and that ability to give honest feedback like great leaders have to do that, right? Because how can they help you grow if they can't give you honest feedback? And so that's an awesome exercise. I highly recommend that. The second exercise, and this one, you've got to have a team that's willing to go deep for this one, but it's called You Know Me If. Okay. So you think about the people in your life that really, really know you, right? Maybe just a handful of people, right? Maybe it's only a couple people. But the idea is you go in a circle and everyone shares something about them that only someone that really knows them would know. Okay. So you go around, everyone shares something. Once you go around the circle, then you say, okay, that was pretty surface level. Let's go deeper. What's something only someone that really, really knows you? We're talking, we want you to go deeper. And basically you go around again. And then, the furthest I've ever gone is 3 times around. I've never gone 3 rounds without somebody in tears, and it's not bad tears, right? They're not crying because the activities traumatize them. They're crying because they're opening up about some of the things that matter more to them than anything else. I had this employee that I did this exercise with, and he was a big, tough, collegiate football player, and just a great guy. And the first 2 rounds, he's just I don't really have anything. There's nothing I could share, And then on the 3rd round, he tells this story about his grandpa who came to every sporting event. And then when he got older, he got diabetes and he had to have his leg amputated. And he and he had to move into like retirement home. And because he didn't like to wear his leg, he would never leave his room. And he was just like, anyway, he just got so emotional, just opening up about how sad he was to have kind of lost this hero of his, to old age. And I mean, it's just like, it changed the dynamic of the team, right? Because when people are willing to be vulnerable about their life and the things that really matter to them, suddenly it's very easy to tell someone like, hey, you know what? I need you to pick up the slack on this thing you're missing. Or, hey, I need you to change the direction where this is headed, right? It just makes that easier when we just know and trust each other with some of our secrets. And look, I actually just posted about this on LinkedIn yesterday, and I had a few people post like, I don't know, I'm skeptical. I think everyone already knows each other's weaknesses, but I'll tell you, I mean, I've seen it make a big impact. And almost every annual I give, I always ask at the end, what was your best takeaway from everyone that attends? And, and the vulnerability exercises are almost always top choice for almost everyone.
That's interesting. I've never done the second exercise. I've done the first exercise, and you're absolutely right. Like, everybody's squirming in the beginning, but everybody wants the feedback. And I was putting myself around the table at actually our last annual as you were explaining kind of the emotions. And you're absolutely right. Like, it's funny because it's about the uncomfortableness of giving, but we all want to receive. Like, we all want to know what we can do better. So we can be a better part of the team. So yeah, that's interesting. So all of this really kind of goes back to culture and creating the right culture and the right environment to be able to have the types of conversations that need to be had. What are some kind of telltale signs for the leadership team that there are potential culture issues?
Yeah. I mean, culture is not, how do I want to say this? There's no hiding good or bad culture, right? Companies that have great culture, they know it and they love it. Most companies don't, and they're usually pretty aware of it. So when you don't have a good culture, some things that are very common is, gossip, backbiting, even among the leadership, right? That leaders will leave meetings and, kind of talk out of school about things that are being discussed. A company with a bad culture, they'll lose high performing people, right? Because if you have a great culture, that's a magnet attracting very talented people. Because really talented people, they can make a lot of money anywhere that they go. And they usually don't pick the place where they can make the most money. They pick the place where they can make the biggest difference and where they're going to be appreciated and happy, right? And so, sometimes people say like, how do you keep from losing bad people? It's like, well, you make them love the environment so much they would never leave. So that's what I would say about, how you know.
That's incredible. And one of the components of EOS is the level 10 meeting. So every week the leadership team is getting together and you're working through short-term issues and you're checking in on accountability and how much progress is being made. The whole notion of a level 10 meeting, it starts on time, ends on time, and the right issues are resolved. Like, what are some other things that when you look at a level 10, is it an effective level 10 or there's some things that that can be worked on?
Yeah. So the secret sauce of the level 10 meeting is really as simple as rating the meeting at the end of the meeting. And why is that so powerful? Because it completely flips the power dynamic on its head. So why does everyone go to meetings right now? They go to meetings because their boss asked them to, or their manager asked them to be there. And if they don't show up and perform, they'll be fired. So everyone is at the meeting trying to make the boss happy. The level 10 meeting structure flips that upside down. Now, the boss is, right, the boss may be running the meeting, unless they have, their integrator running the meeting. But anyway, that's another discussion. But whoever's running the meeting, they've got to perform, because if everyone gives low scores, what everyone's saying is, we spent huge amount of resources for the company for us to all sit here for an hour, and you just wasted our time and you wasted the company's time. And right now there's no vehicle. If you don't have a level 10 meeting, if you don't have ratings at the end, there's no way for people to communicate that. And most bosses don't have the confidence to ask people at the end of a meeting, was that a waste of time or not, right? Because they're not there. He's not there to help make them happy. They're there to make him happy, So just that change in dynamic's great. Now the structure is great too. So So the level 10 meeting, the fact that you start with your scorecard, right? You start by looking at what's the data we care most about and what does it say? And then you look at rocks. What are our biggest priorities and are we focused on those? And only after that do you get into, news and headlines and problems and issues in the company. So what that means is, again, it's flipped on its head. Most companies, you start the meeting and it's like, we got some issues, let's get into our issues. But it's like, whoa. The issues aren't what's going to make the business successful. It is our scorecard on the rocks. Like that's what's going to show we're successful. Just the way you start out by looking big picture before you get in the weeds, I think both those components of the level 10 meeting make it so powerful. Oh, so I got to share this with you. A week ago, I did a poll on LinkedIn and I had people rate their not their level 10, sorry. I had them rate their meetings in general in their business. Okay. And the average, 66% of the respondents rated their meetings as a 6 out of 10 or lower. Okay. So 6 out of 10 or lower. So you think about that, like how many people go to a restaurant? If you go to a restaurant and you give it 6 out of 10, would you ever go back to that restaurant again? Right? Like why are we satisfied with crappy meetings? Right? Like they're like bleeding the life out of us, Anyway, so it's kind of interesting.
That's did you get any comments on that post of like this? Well, actually, because it's public, I'm sure they didn't. But it would be interesting to get some of the qualitative feedback on that of like, pointless, nothing accomplished. We just talked in circles, no decisions made. I'm sure those are the common culprits.
So a few people made comments, right? Lack of agenda. That was a big problem, right? Lack of agenda, lack of direction. But I think the number one issue people have with meetings is that they get to the end and nothing has been decided. And so that's why, the L10 means great structure. So, the next thing I'm going to do is my next post, I'm going to share the results. I'm going to share the results and say like, you wouldn't go to a movie that you gave 6 out of 10 stars. You wouldn't go to a restaurant that you have 6 out of 10 stars. So like, we should stop putting up with this, give your boss a copy of, Traction. Just kidding. Right. Not a bad idea, but just like, hey, there may be a better way, hey, it seems like our meetings are crappy. Could we maybe try a different way to do them, Anyway.
Yep. And you brought this up, and so I'll circle back on it for half a second. You brought up integrators, and it was like a visionary of the integrator. Like in your view, what is the integrator, and what makes a good integrator? Or let's start with, we don't do good here. What makes a great integrator great?
Yeah. So for those that aren't familiar with EOS, although I think a lot of people on this that are listening to this probably are aware, is that, Steve Jobs was this brilliant visionary, but he had this integrator in Steve Wozniak, right? So Steve Jobs Steve Jobs had the vision of all the cool things he wanted to build. And then Steve Wozniak figured out how to make them a reality. Okay. So it's kind of like the integrator is the person that makes the trains run on time and makes the company work. Now, there's this big misconception that the integrator runs the company. And it's not really true. The integrator handles the details, but it takes both of them to run the company. Because without the vision and a consistent, focus on the vision and evolution of the vision, the business won't work. So the visionary and integrator, they're kind of like, peanut butter and jelly. They work together perfectly to grow the company. You asked before about, visionaries that aren't willing to delegate. I have a number of visionaries that they're not willing to take on an integrator. And so they're doing it all themselves. And some people are great natural integrators. Some people are great natural visionaries. I've yet met anyone that's great at both. It's like those strength finders, right? Like someone can't be both super creative and really good at repetitive tasks, right? Like that person doesn't exist, right? So you need to find the right people for the right roles. And most visionaries have no business running the day-to-day details, minutia of their business.
And do you think, so for the visionaries that you're envisioning right now that are either struggling to either acknowledge or go out and find themselves an integrator, do you think that this is like them, a lack of understanding of how to find that integrator? Do you think it's a lack of budget, or do you think it's them saying like, I don't actually need that because like they're my ideas and I can implement through the executive team?
Yeah, great question. I think it's a combination of things. I think there's this sense that nobody could learn everything they know nobody could do everything they do. Like it would be too hard to find that person. And so there's a budget component of that. But also it comes from a misunderstanding. It comes from a misunderstanding of the value of their time, of what they're very best at, right? I was just talking to a company where we planned their year, and we had this conversation. They're like, we want to grow by whatever hundreds of thousands of dollars this year. Great. And we want to build a new website. Okay. How much time is the website going to take? A ton of time. Who's going to have to help? Everyone on the leadership team. And it's like, all right, so do you want a new website or do you want to grow by, $500,000? Right. And, and they all agreed the website is not going to help them hit the revenue target. Right. But I give this example just as the idea of for that company specifically, the visionary, who's an amazing business developer, right? She would be on the sidelines working on the website. So the only person that can really drive great business would be working on the website, which is low value. And that's the way visionaries mistakenly think. Like they undervalue their time at doing what they're best, and they overvalue their time at what they're the worst at, right? And so so that's kind of like the dichotomy for them to realize what they're very best at, and then finding an integrator, or even just picking one of their other executives and saying, you know what, you're going to handle these details now. You're going to run the level 10 meeting. You're going to manage the scorecard. You're going to manage these details so that I can stay head down and focused on what I can do to have the biggest impact on the company. I have never I've met with over 100 companies, right? I don't have over 100 clients, right? But I've met with over 100 companies since I started doing this a couple of years ago, and then 100 more in the accelerator. And I've never met a company yet where the team felt like they didn't need an integrator, right? Like visionaries sometimes think that, but the team never thinks that. They always know that they can see how the visionary is the bottleneck, the CEO is the bottleneck. And it's just so common, you've seen this. Anyway, so.
And when you think about, and I realize that in EOS we shun all titles, and we don't like talking about titles.
Yes.
But people still, whether we like it or not, have titles that they put on their LinkedIn. And I've heard a lot of different philosophies of this integrator role. I've heard everything from it's a president role to a COO could step into it to you could get a chief of staff. How do you feel about kind of those externally facing kind of titles and the capabilities or empowerment of that integrator position?
Yeah. I mean, look, titles are cheap. So it's like, I have nothing against titles. Like if people want certain titles and it makes sense and it doesn't set a bad precedent for the rest of the company, just figure out the titles that work best for you, and I went through this with my startup. We hired this very senior, PR marketing person, and she had a ton of experience, but we only had 12 employees, and she wanted a C-level title. And I was junior. I didn't know. So I was like, she had 20 more years of experience than I did. You know what I mean? So I was like, okay, you're our chief marketing officer. That's fine. Whatever, And then my lead engineer is like, well, if she is, I want to be it too. Anyway, he didn't talk like that, and he's great. I'm still good friends with him, So if he ever sees this podcast, he'll know that I know he doesn't really talk that way, but he wanted the title because it's like, it only seemed equitable. Right. So I just think you just need to be careful with titles and make sure that your people understand that whatever they put on LinkedIn is kind of irrelevant. What matters is that they're getting their work done, right? The stuff they're accountable for is quality, and they're not dropping balls.
Nice. And what's one piece of advice that you'd leave with like an organization or a visionary or someone that's having a 6 out of 10 meeting right now? What's one piece of advice that you would give them if they're thinking about implementing EOS?
Yeah. I guess my biggest advice is if you want to implement EOS, you got to go all the way in, There's another company that I met with recently, and a year ago, they kind of dipped their toe in the water. They had me spend a day with them, and I checked in with them a few times, and they ended up having a good year. But I met with them again a year later, and they just admitted, they're like, yeah, we probably only did, 30% of this, and it had a huge impact on our business. And by the time we had spent our second full day together, they realized all that they were missing, and they're like, all right, that's it. We want to go all in. We're going to do our quarterlies. We're going to do our 2-day annual. Like, you've convinced us. And the reality is, like, doing it halfway it's just so watered down. You got to, if you're going to do EOS, commit to it and go all in.
Love it. And so if someone's listening to this right now and they love everything that they're hearing, obviously they've got to be in Salt Lake City. How would they connect with you? How would they find you?
Yeah. So you can find me on Instagram at Adrian Dayton or LinkedIn, Adrian Dayton. I think I'm the only Adrian Dayton currently. So I've got that going for me. But yeah, look, I only work in Salt Lake, but, I'm glad to host you if you want to come out here to me. And, like I said, I sold my company a few years ago, and after 15 years of being on the road away from my family so much, my kids are all just at an age where it's like, I want to have dinner with my family every night. So I only work here in Salt Lake, but kind of, living the dream. And it's snowing in the mountains, snowed 2 feet over the last day. So, couldn't get out for skiing today, but I'll probably go out in the next day or two.
That's awesome. All right. Last question. Who do you admire most in the EOS ecosystem?
Oh, yeah. So there's a guy named Scott Rusnak, who's just incredible. He's like designed this amazing life where he takes off a month skiing, he takes off a month surfing in Costa Rica, and then he makes over $1 million a year, doing EOS sessions. Like, he's just designed an amazing life, and he's just a super generous, loving person. I mean, I'm like, everyone that meets him so happy for all his success, because he's just like figured out how to do EOS right and also live a good life and be a great person. No problem at all. Yeah, I had a ball. Yeah. Thanks for having me on, Ryan. I appreciate it.
We'd love to stay connected, and we'll reach out when it's going live, and with some promotional assets, and we can share it with the world.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Ryan. Talk to you later.
Confessions of an EOS Implementer is brought to you by Talent Harbor. To find out more about Talent Harbor and our fractional services and talent search solutions for businesses that operate on EOS, visit talentharbor.com. And then make sure to search for EOS Implementer in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Make sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. And on behalf of the team here at Talent Harbor, thanks for listening.